Today we have a special speaker who wears many hats. Darren Pleasance is a daring aviator who's flown over 8,000 hours in corporate jets and on top of glaciers in Alaska. He's also an EAA National Board member and a tech executive here in the Bay Area. So without further ado, welcome Darren. Thanks for joining us.
And thank you. And thank you to everybody for carving out a bit of your Saturday to have me join you and share a bit of my story. Okay, so let's jump in. This is going to be a bit of the story of my aviation journey, and it's also my life journey. It turns out, because they're one and the same. Aviation's been a huge part of my life, really since sort of 10 or 11 years old, flying model airplanes. And I'll go into a bit more of the detail, but it's been a golden thread through my life. I don't fly for a living right now, although I had aspired. As a teenager, I wanted to be an airline pilot more than anything, and for a variety of reasons, which I'll talk about in this talk. That didn't actually happen, and in retrospect, I'm really happy it didn't. Not that it would be bad to be an airline pilot, but the adventure that's unfolded in front of me over my life has been, well beyond my wildest imaginations. And so I thought today I'd share not only the glimpses of that journey, but also some of my own learnings along the way for anybody I encounter that might be equally intrigued about aviation as I am, and hopefully share some perspectives that help others capture some aspect of aviation throughout their lives, whether they do it professionally or not. So I've got mostly just a series of stories and then sort of learnings from that journey along the way. If I start with this, this is I didn't know this, of course, back as a teenager when I started, but it's been just super apparent to me that as I've gone through life, I end up having all these interesting things, these dots that get connected. That top bubble should say cool flying. But what's interesting is I found that as I started doing interesting flying, I would meet interesting people. As I met interesting people, I would get interesting opportunities. And as I got interesting opportunities, I would get interesting jobs. And then oftentimes those led to more cool flying. And so I need to update this graphic. Somehow the thing, but the bottom line is flying led to great people, led to great jobs, led to great people, led to great flying. And this thing has continued on now for 40 years, basically, of this symbiotic relationship between flying, people, and jobs that have allowed me to have this really interesting life. To give you a bit more background on me, to build on what Anand said at the intro, I did start off, early on over in Livermore, so not too far from all of you. I went to Granada High School and got into model airplanes at an early age, and just loved aviation, and found myself looking at the sky a lot as I'd be going back and forth to high school. And we didn't live too far from Livermore Airport, so I would start to ride my bike out to the airport and just watch airplanes. I'd sit with a little radio and listen to pilots talk, and they'd come in and take off and land on runway 25 there. And at about 14 years old, started meeting people that were working on their planes there. They liked me because I was intrigued by aviation, and I'd do anything I could to get close to them. I'd help people change spark plugs and change oil and polish airplanes and do all the things that many of us do. And this is well before Young Eagles existed. So in a sense, there weren't really any, sort of structured ways to get into aviation other than just show up and hang out and hope someone would take you for a ride, which they did. And I ultimately started getting rides in different kinds of airplanes. And Livermore, for those of you who've been there, it's an amazing airport with so many different dimensions of aviation going on. And so I eventually started taking lessons in a 7AC Champ, 65 horsepower Champ, and learned how to fly tailwheel at a young age. Soloed at 16, did kind of that standard stuff. Spent that year of my 16th birthday and beyond learning to fly. Flew a bunch of different airplanes. Got my pilot's license, my private license at 17. Went off to college. Got my instrument rating, commercial rating, flight instructor rating. I'd come home every summer and go to Fremont at the time. For those of you who've been in the Bay Area for a while, sky sailing was there, and I towed gliders in the summertime just to build time. It was all about flying and flying and flying. Ended up becoming a charter pilot down in Santa Barbara, which is where I went to school. That ultimately gave me an opportunity to go to Alaska. Got up there, got hired to fly bush planes out of Talkeetna up onto Mount McKinley. And I'll tell more of these stories in detail as we go through this journey. But came back, got hired by John Travolta to fly for him, flew for him for a year. He had a Hawker jet, HS-125, and got hired by a private equity company to fly there. They had a Citation. That's the picture you see there. They had a Sabreliner as well. I flew that for about 6 years, and then ended up going to business school, primarily because the airlines weren't hiring. Back when I was desperate to become an airline pilot. It just kept failing. They were furloughing Eastern, Braniff, Pan Am, all these airlines were going bankrupt, and there were many thousand-hour pilots on the street. And so, despite having quite a bit of experience, I got my ATP rating at 22 years old. Like, I ended up with a letter because you have to be 23 to officially hold an ATP. So I did my check ride and pass, but had to wait to my 23rd birthday to turn that into an official ATP. So I had quite a bit of flying time in my early 20s, and just nobody was hiring. Despite that, nobody was hiring. And so I ended up going to business school, which led to me getting hired by McKinsey and Company, which I'd never even heard of as a kid growing up learning how to fly. But it's a global management consulting company that works with basically the top companies in the world, Fortune 500 primarily. Did that for 14 years. But while I did that, I built a lot of experience in high tech and a variety of functional areas. I still stayed deeply involved in aviation. I ended up becoming the chapter leader for IAC Chapter 38 over in Livermore for aerobatics. That got me exposed to the national IAC back in Oshkosh, and I ended up building the largest aerobatic chapter in the country. So much like you guys sound like you're doing a great job there in San Carlos, I did something similar in Livermore and built it into a really vibrant chapter. And Tom Poberezny took note of that. He was the CEO or president, basically, of EAA. So I got invited to join the national IAC board. And then Tom liked the role I played on that, so invited me to join the EAA board. And so I've been on the EAA board for probably, 12, 13, something like that years now, which has been a super great experience. I'm a huge fan of EAA. That then led me to a random phone call from Google back in 2012 to want me to come over and join and lead a global team for them. I originally said no. I decided that I'd say yes after them pushing me for a while. I went and joined them. By then, I'd already moved to Oregon. So as I'm speaking to you now, I'm up in Bend, Oregon. Because with McKinsey, it didn't matter where I lived because I was on the road all the time. I was commuting to Korea, commuting to Helsinki, all over the place. And so I moved my family up here because we love to ski and love the outdoors. And I just flew myself back and forth to the Bay Area with a little airplane that I had at the time. And so when I joined Google, I just kept that commitment. I just said, look, I'll join you, but I want to keep living in Oregon. I lived on an airport with a hangar home, so I kept my airplane in the house. And I would just fly down to the Bay Area on Monday, fly home on Thursday. And so I did that with Google for 6 years, a little over 6 years, doing this weekly commute. And then about a little over 2 years ago, Cisco called, going through a major transformation. The head of worldwide sales and marketing called and asked if I would come in and join them and lead a global team for them. And so much like with Google, I ultimately ended up saying yes, and said, only if I can continue to live in Oregon and just commute back and forth. And so they said yes. And so I ended up buying a Piper Meridian because I wanted something a little more reliable. So I've got a turbine-powered pressurized airplane for my commute back and forth, while also staying heavily engaged in the smaller stuff, lots of backcountry stuff. And I'll get into more of that in a minute. And as part of that, I also got involved in all the E-VTOL work that's going on these days, and all the just electric aircraft in general and urban air mobility. And so that's now become another big dimension of what I do. So that's a bit of the journey. And what's been interesting is aviation is the golden thread through all of this. I can point to specific relationships I built along the way that caused me to get the McKinsey opportunity, allowed me to get into business school, got me the Google opportunity, and so on. And so despite the fact that I don't fly for a living right now, I'm still flying as much as ever. And aviation is still probably the number one part of, I guess, how I would define who I am, despite the fact that I got a professional job that's completely unrelated to aviation. So what I thought I'd do is walk you through a few of these journeys. Any one of these adventures I could spend an entire hour on or more describing more about it. When we get to the Q&A part, you can ask me about parts of this if you'd like, but let me just run through a few of the fun ones just to give you a sense of the diversity of aviation that I've had a chance to experience, and I try all I can to help others experience. So here's what I've got now. I have the Meridian on the left. I've got an RB6, and so that's sort of the latest adventure. And then I'm part of a club that's got a T6 and a Mustang down in Hollister. And so I don't own the two on the bottom outright. I'm with 4 other guys in those, but I've got a super awesome diversity of airplanes that I get to fly. And then over the years, I've been super involved in lots of other dimensions. The pits on the left out of Livermore, that was up by Mount Diablo, that picture. When I did the bush flying in Alaska, that's up on the Hilton Glacier. It's Mount McKinley in the background, you can see the top of. And then the citation picture in the bottom, I flew that airplane all over North and South America when I did the private equity work. I thought I'd just go through a few of these adventures and just give you some pictures and give you a sense of what it was like. So I thought I'd start with Alaska. This was when I was in college. I was getting my master's degree in engineering. I really wasn't enjoying it that much. I desperately wanted to be a pilot. And I always liked engineering a lot, but I didn't really want to be an engineer. I love being at the airport in Santa Barbara. UC Santa Barbara is right at the Santa Barbara airport, which was not by accident. I chose that school because of its proximity to the airport. And so, finishing my first quarter of my first year getting my master's, I'd gone to see a presentation by a guy who was an Alaska bush pilot by summer and a physics professor by school year. And it totally inspired me. And I just basically took a leave of absence from college, bought a one-way airline ticket, flew into Fairbanks, and just started going door to door looking for jobs. I ended up getting a job in Talkeetna, like I said, flying the ski planes up onto the glaciers. So this is up in the roof amphitheater looking up at Mount McKinley. And what an adventure, getting to land and take off on these glaciers, sandbars, gravel runways. I did a bunch of work for the Bureau of Land Management, the military flying supplies in and out of military bases. Again, this is a whole hour presentation just on Alaska, but some of the fun pictures, that's when I had a little more hair than I do now. But everywhere we went, we had to carry some form of firearm, and did a lot of flying into Native Alaskan villages, delivering mail or flying out fish eggs, and I did a bunch of stuff with mining companies, flying blasting caps and dynamite. This is one of the mines I flew into. So you did a lot of work off of short and soft field. So when you get your license, you often practice either a short field landing or a soft field landing, and then you get to Alaska and they're short, soft fields. And so definitely a ton of fun. And like I said, that has then gave me the experience landing on short and soft field runways to then just continue that on for the rest of my life here. So although I don't fly in Alaska anymore, I had a Citabria. I just sold that about a month ago, but my wife and I would just jump in that and head east of here. There's tons of runways and lodges you can fly into with little grass runways. And so we would use the Citabria. On the right picture is the Alvord Desert. You just go land in the middle of the desert, basically. And it's a big dry lake bed out there, and go camping. So just tons of adventures that are sort of legacy now of the experience I got up in Alaska. Another one, space. I did not fly the space shuttle. I wish I had. But one of the interesting stories was I was at McKinsey at the time, and I got a call one day from the head of our public sector group. Said, "Hey, there's a woman named Shanna Dale." That was it, Shanna Dale, and she was the number 2 person at NASA. She was the deputy administrator of NASA, and George Bush, I guess Barack Obama had just won the election. George Bush was on his way out. And so she was pretty convinced that, once the administration changed, she would likely lose her job. And so she wanted just some coaching on life, on careers. And I was at McKinsey, and McKinsey's well-respected consulting firm. And so I ended up having lunch. She flew out from DC to have lunch with me out in Palo Alto. And we got talking. She had a great time, and I gave her some career perspectives and made some introductions for her. And as she was walking out the door of the restaurant, she says, "By the way, if you ever want to see a shuttle launch, let me know. I can help hook you up." It's like, oh my God. So I said, absolutely. So it turns out the Endeavor was going up a few months later. And so I reached out, and her people set us up. And so my son and I went out to Kennedy Space Center and hooked us up. I just a few of the fun pictures, because this was entirely because of this relationship I built. And the reason people thought of me was not just because I was at McKinsey, but they knew I loved aviation. So I might have this connection to her. And so I won't read all the stuff on the left, but I became enamored with the shuttle because it was just such an amazing feat of engineering. And I had gotten my degree in mechanical engineering. So I was just mesmerized by the intricacy of what our engineers had built. But, I got to go out here, and I'm sitting on the bus next to this old fellow. And as they're taking us out to see the Endeavor, you can see it on the launch pad back there. And I get chatting with them, nice guy. And turned out his name is Tom Stafford. He was the commander of Apollo 10. And he had been the guy that went out to the moon and went down to not too far from the surface. He was the last flight before Neil Armstrong and team did their flight. And so just cool getting to sit next to him and hear his stories as we drove around the Space Center. Got to go in. They had the orbital processing facility. The Atlantis was in there. Said, let us go in and get up in the cockpit and look at the shuttle cockpit. And they were talking about how all the upgrades, these were now all these digital screens that had only recently been put in. Mostly it was kind of a steam gauge machine until more recently when they put the EFIS systems in there. This is my son at the time when he was, I guess, 10 years old or so, underneath the belly of the Atlantis space shuttle. You can see the nose gear off in the distance there. But let's kind of basically climb all over the outside of it, which was also amazing. Then at night, they took us out to see the Endeavor. It was on the launch pad and get right up next to it. And And then that evening, we sat out there. This is, for those of you who ever watched Apollo launches, this is where people watch the Apollo launches, and they had us there with all the astronaut families. You can see the shuttles off in the distance there. So it's the closest you're allowed to get without actually being an emergency rescue crew who are in bunkers closer. But otherwise, this is where the press is, and the families, and also all the dignitaries, so all the who's who of the world who come to watch these things. So that was Mike Griffin. He was the head of NASA at the time. So this was Shanna's boss. And then Neil Armstrong was there. He came to watch the shuttle things, got a chance to meet him. And here, he was a fairly aloof sort of fellow, but he was nice enough there. And so again, it's just a bunch of interesting people. And as part of that, so that was that whole, again, that's a whole hour presentation on that. But I came back from that. I got a call. This is months after that. I got a call from a guy who said, "Hey, I'm coming out to the Bay Area. I have an RV. I'm looking for a hangar." And I was leading Chapter 38, the IAC club, and so he found my name because he thought if I'm involved with the IAC, maybe I could help him find a hangar for his RV. And we got talking. His name ends up being Ed Liu. Some of you may know Ed. He's in the Bay Area, but he's a mission specialist for NASA. And so we became friends, and he had great stories of climbing around on the International Space Station and stuff. And he calls me one day. I was up in Seattle. I was at Microsoft. They were a client. He says, "Hey, what are you doing tomorrow?" I said, "Oh, I got client meetings." He said, "Oh, that's too bad, because the space shuttle simulator at Moffett has come available. The 2 astronauts canceled that were supposed to come in. I was going to let you come fly it." I was like, "Oh, you got to be kidding." So I, of course, cancel everything, fly back down to the Bay Area. And this is just a shot at Moffett Field of the full motion 6-axis autopilot, not just the 3-axis autopilot. So I can talk about that separately, how do you get the extra axes, but it could actually induce G's and do all sorts of stuff. So I got to fly that and do several landings, one at Kennedy Space Center, a couple at Edwards Air Force Base. So again, all because of this interesting network of people I've started to meet. This is Charlie Precourt. He and I are both on the board. Charlie's a 4-time space shuttle commander. He's on the EAA board as well. This is on a trip back from an EAA board meeting. He let me come back with him in his little citation and took me back to Utah where he lives. And we've become good friends and great stories. And again, the point is these interesting people you get to meet because of this shared interest in aviation that all of us have. So then we'll shift gears. Next one was aircraft carrier. This is another one of those funny phone calls I got from Tom Poberezny, again, the president of the EAA at the time. And Tom called me and says, "Hey, what are you doing in about 2 weeks, blah, 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 this date?" And I said, "Well, I'm kind of busy, blah, blah." And he said, "Well, that's too bad." He said, we're going to go tour an aircraft carrier. And I said, "Oh," well, I was thinking, well, I've done that. I've been over to the Hornet over in Alameda, and I've been down to San Diego, and it is cool. I love doing it. But I was busy and had kind of done that. But as I talked to him, it became clear this was not just go tour like the Hornet. This was go through a training program with the Navy, fly out to an aircraft carrier off the coast of Mexico, in this case, trap on the carrier, live on it for 2 days, and then catapult off and come home. So like, how do you say no to that, right? So I said yes to that. And, several weeks later, I was down in Coronado and San Diego, and we went through the whole thing. And this is where they basically bring you in and they walk you through. It's basically, it's a PR thing, but what they want are people who've got ability to communicate with lots of other people, just tell the Navy story through the eyes of a civilian. And so they give you a briefing at Coronado. That's Tom Poberezny and me heading out to the plane. That's the plane called the C2 COD, carrier onboard delivery, that would take us out to the Ronald Reagan was the aircraft carrier we went to. This is on the deck. They take you right out there. You're 10 feet from the wingtip of these F-18s, full afterburner, getting launched off the thing. And they have their little red and white line. You can't see it in this picture, but they just say, as long as you're on this side of that red line, a wingtip can't hit you, and we'll let you sit and watch them fire off F-18s all day long. If you cross the red and white line, you shut down the entire operation, so don't cross the line. And so we sat there, and the noise is unlike anything you've ever heard when you've got that proximity to full afterburner F-18s. And same with landing, right? They've got you right on the deck, and all these F-18s are coming in at 135 knots and trying to grab the number 3 wire, and super, super cool. And this was about 200 miles off the coast of Mexico where we did this. Night takeoffs and landings, you get up on Vulture's Row and get to watch these guys going out. This was a fueling tanker. You can see all the fuel tanks on the bottom of it. So this airplane would have weighed 65,000 pounds or so. So they go out with full afterburner, the most afterburner you can do. So the amount of noise and the light from the afterburner is just incredible in the darkness. get to go up in the captain's chair and pretend like you're commanding the Ronald Reagan. And then they load you back up in the back of the cod, and they take you out to the cat, and they hook you up, and it's the coolest feeling because you don't really know when you're going to go because you're not up in the cockpit, you're in the back there, but you hear the engines come up and the whole airplane's vibrating and shaking. You've watched enough airplanes launch that you know the sequence and roughly what's going on out there as they check their controls and do all their stuff. But then all of a sudden, boom, it hits, and it's the coolest experience to get launched off a carrier, I got to say. So I feel very privileged to have had a chance to do that. And I got lucky. I got to do it twice because then I got a call a year ago, almost exactly a year ago, by a guy named Jim DiMatteo, another interesting person I've met. He was the head of Top Gun. He ran Top Gun for the U.S. Navy. And he and I had become friends again through EAA. And he called me and said, hey, I got one seat left for an aircraft carrier tour the day after Thanksgiving. And he says, I've got nobody to go because people are with their families on Thanksgiving. But I was already in California. And he said, if you want to be in San Diego, I can get you on the carrier. And I was like, absolutely. So I did Thanksgiving on Thursday. And then Thursday night, I was down in San Diego. And the crew that went was this crew. Jim is the guy in the bottom right-hand corner, Jim DiMatteo. So he, again, was the head of Top Gun for the Navy, then also went on to run Red Bull Air Races. And everybody in this picture are Red Bull Air Race folks. So the guy in the top, kind of just to my right, Paul Bone, he's one of the top, he's won more pretty much than anybody. There's another guy that's not in this picture that is actually the most winning Red Bull Air Race pilot. The two guys in the bottom left, their black jackets, fly the Red Bull helicopter. So if you ever go to air shows and you see the Red Bull helicopter these days being flown, it's those guys. So I got to spend several days on the carrier with this collection of folks who are some of the top pilots in the world with great stories about stuff they've done around the world with Red Bull. Gotten to know Sean Tucker a lot over the years just because he's into aerobatics. Obviously, I ran the aerobatic chapter in Livermore. He was head of Young Eagles, as you probably all know, for a while, and so he was very active in that. And I just became friends, and he was just always the most gracious guy in the world. And so I got called one day, since I was in the Bay Area, and he was going to go do some formation stuff over the city in advance of Fleet Week, and so asked me if I want to come along and just have some fun with them. So I showed up. This was a briefing over to Oakland Airport with Sean and a few others. Randy Howell, this guy with the bottle in the right, he leads the Patriots aerobatic team. You guys have probably seen the jet team, goes out of Byron. And so we just met and talked about it. And then I went up in a Citation. I was in a CJ3, and that was obviously Sean in his airplane. Then we had a photo ship in the Seneca there. And so we just flew in formation over the bay. And this is the picture. So I was in the Citation there in formation. So the prior picture was basically, just the opposite of this. So these guys took that picture from the Seneca. So you get some cool experiences, in this case, over Alcatraz and over the city. I love giving back to high school kids. I love the story at the beginning before we started here, where you guys talked about bringing some of the Young Eagles folks in. This was a group of high schoolers from a local high school, Sisters, Oregon, which is about 15 minutes from my house here. And they have an aviation program. And Tom Poberezzi called me, this is several years ago now, and said, hey, we're doing a celebration for Bob Hoover. Bob was still alive at the time, and they were going to host a big event for him down in Los Angeles and Hollywood. And asked but the main reason too, in addition to celebrating Bob, the whole purpose of this event was to bring kids, to basically bring teenagers or early adults into it, to hopefully inspire some of them with proximity to all these interesting aviation legends, to want to pursue aviation in some form. So I basically underwrote a scholarship for this class of high schoolers, and we took them down there basically, and they were put up at the Beverly Hills Hilton, and that had this unbelievable event. And so you can see Bob Hoover in the top left. I got to spend time with him. James Lovell is on the right, so the Apollo 13, famous Apollo 13 commander. On the bottom, you see Harrison Ford. There's a number of Sean Tucker was there. There's Harrison Ford and Bob Hoover, and just a super cool opportunity to meet interesting people. And for me, the best part was these kids had an experience that they would almost be unlikely to ever have otherwise, and it was awesome to be able to give them that. And you're just having these great dinners. So this was me with Gene Cernan in the middle, who was the last man on the moon, and so cool. And then that's Sully Sullenberger. So I'm getting to sit at this table, these amazing people hearing these amazing aviation stories. And again, the only reason that happened to me was I just happened to be in this interesting orbit of people who all love aviation. A few more as I kind of wrap up. The whole E-VTOL thing has really taken off, right? There's all these interesting innovations going on with Uber Elevate, which was now just sold to Joby, just Joe Ben's company there in the Bay Area. Larry Page is very engaged, and I got to know Larry at Google again through aviation. The only reason I know Larry at Google, not because I worked there, I was one of thousands of people, but he loves aviation, so he and I had a chance to connect through that. And through that, combined with the EAA, combined with all these people I'm meeting as I go through my life journey here, has got me now really pulled into the whole world of electric aviation and urban air mobility. And so I'm now on the board of a group called Up Ventures. All they do is invest in these kinds of technologies. And it's given me a chance to get to know the founders of most of these companies. The one on the far left is Opener. The product's called Blackfly, and those guys are based right there off of Highway 101 down in, I think it's off of San Antonio Road, specifically down in sort of Palo Alto, Mountain View area. And I've gotten to know the founder of that really well, and it's funded by Larry Page, and just super cool, interesting people, which has allowed me to get to know a lot of people on more than just a passing basis. So Eric Lindbergh on the left, that's Charles Lindbergh's grandson, and he and I have done a bunch of stuff through different events, aviation events. Larry Page is the next one. So this is Larry and me at Oshkosh. I was his host at Oshkosh, and so I spent the entire day driving him around, showing him all the things that we do with the EAA and the event. George Bush next. He's a very avid aviator, and for one of the events that I'm involved in called Up, he wanted to be part of it. He wanted to come and talk at it and talk about how important he felt aviation was and innovation was, and so he showed up and had a chance to get a picture with him. And then and that's why did I just forget his name all of a sudden? But yeah, founder of the Segway, and just cool, interesting guy that was also part of Up, and he's
Dean Cameron.
Dean Kamen.
Kamen.
There you go. Yeah, Dean Kamen. And Dean's done a whole bunch of stuff. I mean, the amount of robotic stuff he does. He does FIRST, which is the whole FIRST robotics competition that he created and built this global movement with hundreds of thousands of kids around the world involved in robotics. Just a fascinating guy, nice guy, interesting guy, a little quirky, brilliant. And again, through all these interesting journeys, I've now managed to get to know him, and we talk periodically. I wouldn't say we're best friends, but probably 3 times a year we'll talk about something. He'll call me on my cell or I'll call him. And it's just super fun because they're all equally interested in aviation, but come from such different backgrounds. And so let me just wrap up with some reflections on this, because to me, as I do look back, wow, what an amazing journey and these cool, interesting experiences and people. And I love people, and so I'm always fascinated by the chances I get to interact with some amazing individuals. And one, as I mentioned at the beginning, aviation definitely is the golden thread. Despite wanting so badly for aviation to be the career I ended up in, the fact that I didn't doesn't seem to have detracted at all from my sort of depth of involvement in and passion for aviation. And so that's one big learning. I come across a lot of people who wanted some dimension of aviation to happen, whether it's a certain job in aviation or they wanted to get certain ratings or whatever. And it's turned out not to be as important. It's really just the fact that I'm deeply engaged in it that has been the reason why I get to do all these different things and meet these interesting people. So that's one. As I said, open doors beyond my wildest expectations, right? When I wrote my college applications, what a cool thing to have in my college application that I was a private pilot already by the time I was 17. And so I'm sure that helped me. And I have no doubt I went to UCLA for business school, and I did well in undergrad. I had good grades and stuff, but I had never worked for a Fortune 500 company. I was a public school kid all the way through. I hadn't gone to more prestigious schools. But I'm confident that a big part of why I got into business school and ended up doing well, got a scholarship there, I was seen as someone who had ambition and drive and could see things through and had a degree of maturity and responsibility, all of which were, absolutely embedded in everything I did in aviation. Lifetime friendships, all these pictures I've shown you, these are all people that I did just bump into. I've now gotten to know pretty much all of them, all those pictures I showed you, in great ways where I can ask for career advice, and they'll often make introductions to other people who help me pursue things that I'm really interested in. And so again, aviation's been the reason those things have happened. These adventures have been awesome. I look back at some of these pictures and go, wow, that was, landing on glaciers. There's nothing cooler than getting to do that. Or, landing on an aircraft carrier, or being just a few miles from a space shuttle launch and hearing the sound that that thing makes. These are all unbelievable experiences that I feel super privileged to have had a chance to have, and do everything I can to help bring as many of those to other people as possible. And then the career opportunity. That's what's been great. I do think like one specific example is at McKinsey. I got in there. I didn't think I'd survive at McKinsey. Again, public school kid. I was not one of the sort of upper echelon, most accomplished people out there in the world. So I thought for sure that I would get in and likely flunk out after a couple of years, because they're very aggressive at upper out, they call it. But I ended up, I did do well. And what was interesting is that I made friends with a guy who was a very successful person there, senior partner, and he had dreamed of flying his whole life. And he was probably in his mid 40s at the time. And when he heard that I was a pilot, not only a pilot, I was a flight instructor, he asked if I would take him flying, which I did in Seattle out of Renton Airport there. And long story short, he became completely enamored with it, got his private, shortly after bought a twin Comanche, got his multi-engine rating. And he just texted me the other day showing me the Citation 5 he just bought. He's now, fully rated. He's got probably 3,000 hours, ATP, awesome pilot, very disciplined. And we became good friends, great friends, actually, among almost best friends, certainly at work. And he became a mentor of mine at McKinsey to help me and coach me and apprentice me to help me be successful there. And so we've now got this really symbiotic relationship where he helped me be incredibly successful in business. I helped him get into aviation, and he's now equally successful in that. He's retired. He made a lot of money in his life, so he's giving back, funding scholarships for kids, mostly a diverse nature. So he's got Black high schools in the Midwest. He's funding scholarships for them to go get their license. And so nice, great full circle example of how this has played out. And obviously sense of pride and accomplishment. I love the fact that there's always something else to strive for, rating a new airplane, whatever it is. It's awesome. And so I guess that's my main takeaway, as it says here. If you love aviation, lean into it. Doesn't matter whether you want to do it for a living or not. There's so many dimensions of it. Once you get your instrument rating, get your backcountry rating, get your tailwheel endorsement, right? Get your helicopter rating. And there's just so much to do. And of course, last of the EAA, what attracted me most to the EAA is it was about all things aviation. It wasn't just about home building. I'm not against that at all. I love home building, but it was about so much more. It was about home building as kind of the foundation, and then every other dimension of aviation. And you can go to, for those of you who have not been to AirVenture out at Oshkosh late July, that's got to be on your bucket list. It is the most spectacular event in the world, a week of nonstop aviation at a scale that you can only imagine. So I think with that, Anand, I'm going to wrap here, and I'm happy to take any questions, perspectives others would like to share, whatever you'd all like to talk about.
Yeah, so Darren, intriguing presentation, and it was really fascinating to learn about your career journey and the truly extraordinary adventures that aviation has provided you. Now it's time for some Q&A. Please put your questions in the chat box, which should be at the bottom of your screen. So our first question is, how long did it take to fly from Oregon and California when you were commuting? And what airports do you fly in and out of?
Great question. Yeah. So when I was first starting it, I had an airplane called a Wheeler Express, which is basically like a home-built Cirrus. It's a composite fixed gear, 4-passenger, had a Lycoming IO 540 in it. That was a 185 knot airplane. And at 185 knots, it's about 2 hours and 15 minutes or so. With the Meridian, it's about an hour and 40. So nowadays, my commute typically ends up being about an hour and 45. And I fly from Bend Airport now. When I lived in my hangar home, I just sold that recently, but when I lived in the hangar home, that was in Sun River, just south of here, about 10 miles south of Bend. But now I'm out of Bend Airport. So I go from Bend to San Carlos, and my hangar is on the southwest side, M73. So I park my airplane in the hangar. I keep a little car there that I use for work. So I pull the car out, drive to work, get a hotel close to, used to be Google, now Cisco. And then on Thursday afternoons, usually around 3 o'clock, drive back to San Carlos, park my car in the hangar, fly the airplane home, again, hour and 45 back. I haven't done that since February, given all the COVID stuff. But once this is over, I'll get back into some form of that pattern.
Yeah, tell us the story of the favorite aircraft photos that framed your room.
Oh, yeah. I don't know if you can see those. Let me see if I can. I guess you can. Yeah. So the Pitts picture up there, actually the same one that I had on the at the beginning of my presentation. That was up by Mount Diablo, so just out of Livermore. I flew that. That's an S2B. I was a Pitts instructor for a long time over at Attitude Aviation, so I got a nice air-to-air shot of that. The T6 was a guy named Gordon Kibbe out of Livermore had that T6, and he's passed away now. But that was a painting actually of his airplane, one of the most beautiful restorations of a T6 that I'd ever seen. I don't know if you can see if I go a little more that way. That you probably can't quite see it. You can see the aircraft carrier. That's the USS Ronald Reagan down below. But this picture over here, I used to own a Laser, which is owned by a guy named Dave Watson now over in Livermore. He's painted it red, but at the time I had it, it was a blue airplane. So I was in formation with a T6, and I rolled upside down and pulled into formation upside down, and then a guy named Tony Banta pulled up alongside me in his yellow T6. And then all the other pictures, for the most part, are horse pictures because my wife is into horses and my daughter's into horses as well. So in fact, I live on if you could see out the window here, you'd see a 40-acre horse farm. So my wife runs it. We've got about 5 of our own horses and about 25 horses that belong to other people. And we do horse training, jumping, rehabilitation, retirement horses, and so on. So she runs the farm. I do my Cisco stuff and then do my aviation stuff. So it's very symbiotic, and it's I think the only thing we're missing is boat. If I wanted to have the 3 most expensive hobbies in the world and fastest ways to get rid of money, I would have airplanes, horses, and boats. So I've still got work to do on that.
While landing on the aircraft carrier, did you do the landing?
I did not. No, great question. I'll stop sharing my screen here so I can see all of you guys more. I did not. No, I'm a passenger. So yeah, so I was along for the ride. That would have been cool to do that, but I guess I'll take at least getting to experience as a reasonable second.
What are your thoughts on the E-VTOL and the urban air mobility market?
Yeah, I think it'll become real, meaning that I do think we're going to find examples of where there's a whole bunch of stuff in that, right? Because there's the actual autonomous aircraft dimension of it. There's also all the electric aviation dimension of that. There's all the different material science that's in there. There's a lot of different aspects. There's a regulatory environment. So if you look at all of those, which make it interesting to me, I think what we'll start to see is electric or more likely hybrid powered vehicles, because we still don't have the energy density and batteries to really make them super practical. So we'll probably start to see hybrid vehicles, so a mix of sort of traditional propulsion, most likely generating electricity to power an electric motor. Most likely we'll see cargo as the first place we go. So you'll start to see examples of where you'll have autonomous aircraft flying cargo from one place to the next before you'll start to see passenger related operations. And I think it'll be interesting to see what happens when it comes to the different types of power sources, because there's a lot of innovation, like down in Hollister, for instance, where they're looking at fuel cells that are hydrogen basically powered with water as the output. There's a lot of interesting innovation going. I do think it'll happen, though, ultimately, where we will someday step into a vehicle and go from point A to point B in an autonomous sort of way, just because the technology can absolutely do it. If you look at Uber, something in the range of 80+% of their trips are less than 60 miles. And so if you could do that with an electric powered, multi-engine, autonomous thing, where a trip from San Francisco to Palo Alto might take, 12 minutes, something like that, and you could do it for $8 or something, right? You compare that to an Uber ride down there for $45, you start to get some pretty compelling economics. But we have to overcome the psychological aspect. People aren't yet ready to step into a autonomous aircraft, electrically powered, with unproven technology. So I think that's why I think cargo will be where we start to see that first, and they'll start doing it in places where you don't have they can have routes that aren't flying over people's homes and all that to meet some of the safety requirements the FAA would have.
And what is the typical range of E-VTOL aircrafts?
Well, some of the hybrid ones are doing hundreds of miles now. You see like Amp Air and some of these guys, or there's a fellow that's got Harbor Air up in Vancouver, British Columbia, right, where he's retrofitted a Beaver with all electric, basic batteries and electric motor. And that's perfect for his kind of business. And he's a cool guy. I don't know him well, but I've gotten to talk to him. And his point is most of his flights are 20 minutes or less. He's going from seaplane base to seaplane base to seaplane base. And majority of his flights are over water. So if you had an engine failure, he'd just glide down and land on the water. And so from a use case where we might be able to get the regulatory authorities to let these things start to operate so we can build experience and understand true safety rates and reliability, that's a good example where you don't need to go hundreds of miles. You just need to go 20 minutes at a pop, and you can swap batteries and so on. It'll be a while though before you'll get on an electric airplane and go from San Francisco to New York. Right? That I'm not sure is anywhere in the foreseeable future.
How did being a pilot affect your family life?
Well, it's given us great adventures. I didn't show many of my family pictures except for that one with my wife. But the where we were doing backcountry stuff, part of, I wouldn't say I got lucky that she likes aviation, because probably if she hadn't liked aviation, there's a good chance we wouldn't have got married. Because she met me when I was a pilot. I just finished flying for John Travolta in Santa Barbara and had taken up a job with this private equity company. And that's about when she met me. She was still finishing her undergrad rating. I had graduated already. I was just working in Santa Barbara. And so, she got a chance to go on a few of my adventures with me early on. And I think she liked it. This is well before kids. I remember when I first took her on the Citation for the first time, she was like, "Oh my God, this airplane's so small." Right. And I think back to like all of you and me, right? A Citation's an amazing airplane, right? That's a big airplane for most of us. But for her, having only been on airliners, she was a little bit nervous about going on this tiny little jet. And of course, she got used to it, loved it. I mean, what a great experience. And she was just always a trooper. I owned lots of different airplanes. And maybe one point, just for marital bliss, for those of you who are married, one of my learnings in life has been, I just think it's super important to know where it is you get your energy, right? What is it that drives you? And, it gives you energy. And, especially after we were married and had kids, you get all kinds of pressures on you for competing demands on your time. And I was at McKinsey at the time too, which was, often a 60 to 80 hour week. You're working crazy hours. And so one of the things the two of us did that I think was really powerful is she was big into horses. And even I might be gone 4 days a week, and here she is, a single mom, essentially raising our first child. Then we had 2 kids, raising both of them. That was super stressful. So I would come home and help with that afterwards. But then like on Saturdays, I would take the kids entirely, and she would go off and ride horses and not have to think about me, kids, anything. She could just be with her horse. And conversely, she was great with me on aviation. I owned a Pitts S1S over in Livermore, and I would just leave, despite having been gone for multiple days already that week. She knew that was important to me, and I would get in my car on either a Saturday or Sunday morning. We'd trade off between horses and planes. I'd go to Livermore, and I get kind of a 5-hour window to just go fly to Pitts and just have a great time. And it was my mental therapy. And then I'd come back and be a dad and husband and all those things. So I guess that's how we made that work. She was supportive of aviation. She loved the adventures it gave the two of us and now the whole family. And she realized how important it was to me, just like I realized how important horses were to her. And we carved out time to let each of us invest real focused energy around those topics.
What are companies in the Bay Area that are working on E-VTOL?
There's a lot. Joby Aviation, JOBY, is a big one that's down in Santa Cruz, and they just bought Uber Elevate from Uber, and so that's definitely one to check out. There's this company, what's it called now? It's the one that with the hydrogen company, hydrogen-based product down in Hollister. I've forgotten the name, and then also Larry Page has a company down in Hollister, and it's escaping me. It used to be part of Kitty Hawk. But now they've changed the name and I'm forgetting it now. So there's 2 down in Hollister that I'm aware of. There's Opener, which has the Black Fly, which I think is probably the furthest along in this area. They're doing some amazing stuff, and they're based off of San Antonio Road down there in the Mountain View, Palo Alto area. Those are the ones I know of, and I'm sure there are more. Those are the ones I know of. And then up here in Bend, Bend is very aviation oriented. We've got Epic Aircraft that's just gotten certification. They're not doing stuff, but super cool aviation stuff. You've got what's it called? Stratus Jet, which is a single engine, experimental jet now, but they're trying to become certified. And then obviously Evolution, Lancer Evolution is up here. There's a bunch of really cool aviation stuff up here too. So yeah, there's lots of opportunities in the Bay Area to get involved with cool aviation stuff if you want to.
Any plans on giving Elon Musk a check ride? I heard he has plans to fly to a nearby spaceport.
And giving who a check ride, you said?
Elon Musk.
Oh, Elon Musk. Well, I haven't actually met him. He's one of the, it's kind of interesting. I'm surprised I haven't, because I know he and Larry Page know each other, and I would have thought Elon would come out and spend time at AirVenture. Although we don't do as much on space as much, so maybe that's why he's not. So yeah, I haven't actually met him yet, but he's on my list. I'm always fascinated by just how innovative he is and his ability to just challenge the status quo and get stuff done. We had Jeff Bezos out at Oshkosh 2 years ago. He brought his Blue Origin's rocket out there and had it on display. So most of those guys who are into space just like aviation in general. And so, and if you like aviation in general, you have to come to Oshkosh. There's just no other place in the world. So you end up seeing the who's who of aviation in some form or another there.
Yeah. Are there any other questions? Just put them in the chat.
Yeah, any live questions? I'm happy to take.
Well, just one state.
Yeah.
Thomas, you froze.
Yeah, you froze, Thomas.
There, I was out at EAA a couple years ago, and the black fly promise.
Yeah, you are. You're good.
Am I moving again now? Okay. So I was at an Oshkosh, and the innovation tent, they had black fly, and that was extremely interesting. So my dad and I spent like an hour and a half just sitting there, and they had a demo and everything. So anybody that gets out to Oshkosh you're in for a treat.
Yeah, you all have to add it on, and I'm pretty sure it'll go this year. I mean, knock on wood, we had to cancel it, obviously a few months ago, but we just had a board meeting a few weeks ago, and as of right now, we're anticipating that it will go. We'll find out. Obviously, it depends how the vaccine's going and any other government regulations. But we had to cancel obviously last summer just because they have their wave 1, wave 2, they're different waves of opening, and at the time we had to make the decision. They were only on groups of 10 people, and obviously AirVenture more than 10 people there, and so we made the right call because there's no way it could have happened given where things were in August and late July. But we're anticipating it going. So as you said, you should go. I'm on the innovation committee, so we put together that innovation showcase, the tent that you talked about, and then I got to know Larry Page, as I mentioned. Larry's funding Opener, and so he put me in touch with a guy named Marcus Lang, who's the founder of Opener, and we just thought that would be cool to have them kind of be the anchor tenant in that tent, as you said. And so, yeah, they got kind of prime real estate, and they basically built that simulator that you mentioned only for AirVenture. They wanted to give people a chance to experience it. And it sounds like, I hope you had a chance to sit in it and put on the VR goggles and fly it. Yeah, cool. So yeah, they'll be back too. Marcus is very, very much a big fan of EAA.
It's really amazing what's going on in the E-VTOL community. I mean, there's guys who are like souping up the equivalent of Pixhawk, which is used to run, smaller drones, and then, flying people in them all the way to way more sophisticated control systems. There's just so much, innovation and approaches in that area. It's amazing.
Yeah, I think like any new technology, there'll be a lot of things that fail. Where just the economics won't work out. They may actually crack some technical challenge, but the cost of doing it is just never economically viable. But that's part of the journey, is you'll learn, and then you kind of push the state of thinking together. This UP event, we do an UP event every year. It was supposed to happen about a month ago or so. We had to cancel it for all the COVID reasons. But UP was formed by a group of people who just love aviation. A guy named Cyrus Seguri and Ben Marcus were the founders of it, essentially. And Cyrus and Ben founded a company called Jet Aviva, which was basically focused on taking generally people of reasonably good means who love aviation but don't have the skills to fly a jet but aspire to fly a jet someday. And what they would do is intercept them in their life cycle. Maybe they've got a 172, maybe they've moved up to a Cirrus or something, but they really want a jet and have got the financial means to have a jet, just not the experience. And what these guys would do is just partner with them and help them go from a Cirrus to maybe a twin Cessna to maybe eventually like a Meridian or something, getting some turbine experience, and then all the way up to buying their first jet, and then on and on and on. It turned out there's enough people in the country that have the means to do that they built an incredibly successful business that then sold, made some good money. And Ben went off and formed a company called AirMap, which is now embedded in DJI drones and all these things. It's basically the airspace management platform that allow us all to kind of operate with fixed wing aircraft, helicopters, drones, and so on. So Ben's done well with AirMap, and they formed UP. And what they've done now with UP is they've convened all these who's who of aviation, mix of investors and inventors, people with money and people with ideas. And so you go to this event. We had our second one was last year in Texas, which is where George Bush showed up. And it's hosted by Ross Perot Jr. So Ross Perot Sr., the ex-presidential candidate, it's hosted by his son on his ranch. You're out on this I don't know how many 1,000-acre ranch with all these interesting people. And the prior year was hosted by Stuart Walton. So Sam Walton's grandson, who's also big into aviation in Bentonville, Arkansas. Again, all these interesting people show up. And it's cool to see it because you have all the inventors who bring the latest in technology and share it. And then you have these people in the audience who are all very wealthy, some of them billionaires, who want to help make this happen. They love the idea and the opportunity. And so you get to see this interaction between them. So I'm quite confident with that combination that good things will happen. I just feel it happen over the coming years, not months for sure.
Yeah. Have you seen our newly built RV-12?
I haven't, no, but I'd love to see it. When I sit on the board back in Oshkosh, we kind of all have our seats. They put our name tags in there. So the guy to the left of me on the board is Dick Van Grunsven. So of course, the founder of Vans. And so it's awesome. And now that I own an RV6, I'm part of the family. It's just great. I didn't build it. I wished I had. And I'd like to build an RV14. That's kind of my dream right now. I'd like actually an RV8 because I like tandem, having done all the aerobatic stuff I've done. But there's something nice if you're going to go with your spouse or friend to being able to sit side by side. And the RV6 is a little bit small, but it reminds me of my pits in terms of maneuverability and fun. And RV14 feels like the perfect combo, a little bit wider, a little bit bigger, but also equally sporty and aerobatic. So yeah, I've become a huge fan of what Dick and that whole organization have done. Those are great airplanes.
Well, we'd love to issue a formal invitation to have a flight in our RV-12. We'd love to show it off.
Is it at San Carlos? Where do you guys keep it?
San Carlos.
Perfect. Well, I will take you up on that invitation. I would love to go do that.
We're in Alpha Hangars.
What's that, Thomas?
We're in Alpha Hangars.
Alpha, okay, yeah. Yep, I know exactly where you are. Yep.
And we're very grateful. San Carlos County donates a half hangar for us to use as a build space. And so not only can you see the one that we've built and is flying, but any week now, our tail kit will be in for the next one. And we're super excited about that.
That's so cool. Well, a huge thank you from me to all of you for doing that. Right? It's become so much harder than it was when I was early in my career of this thing. I was a teenager, and at the time, Livermore had one runway. Now it's got 2-5 right and left, had one runway, no hangars on the south side, no fences. And I would just ride out there on my bike, and I would ride down the edge of the taxiway or sit on the end of the runway with my little Radio Shack transmitter listening to 118.1, the tower frequency there. And, and in doing that, I met all these people who eventually took me for rides. Nowadays, it's so much harder with fences everywhere. And I'd say, airports not as excited to have kids riding their bikes around the ramp, right? In fact, you'd never see that, right? But that's exactly how it happened back then. And so we need something else like Young Eagles, right? And like the ability to build an airplane and get your hands on and do that sort of thing. So huge thank you to you guys for investing your time to do that.
What was your aviation highlight of 2020?
Aviation highlight of 2020? Probably there's been a lot. There's a couple because I bought the RV6 and that's been really fun. I love it because it's taken me back to my Pitts days, and the Pitts is my favorite airplane that I've ever owned. So it's not, this airplane's not as challenging to land as the Pitts, although I always enjoyed the challenge of landing a Pitts. But it's more tame and sort of a better ride for my passengers in a sense. So that's been fun. I would say, the Meridian has been a time machine and an escape machine, because with all the craziness that's going on between COVID, the fires that we talked about at the beginning of this with crazy air quality, just, all the drama around the election, all these things, right, that all of us have a certain amount of stress going on. It's just been great. I can jump in that Meridian. And so in this case, doing trips to Idaho, where in the Meridian, Idaho is an hour away. I can go to Coeur d'Alene. I can go to all these interesting places out there. And I love the outdoors. And so we had a bunch of adventures. We went on a 7-day river rafting trip down the Salmon River over in Idaho. It's the whole family got to go. And, the airplane was the way to do it. I could leave 3 hours before that trip departed, land at the airport and catch up, whereas everybody else that flew on the airlines had to come in at least a day or more in advance to make sure they were there. And so that's probably the highlight, because it gave us some cool experiences in an otherwise challenging year, and it was the airplane that did that.
Thank you for taking the time out for an amazing presentation. To everyone else at the EAA, we have a plethora of opportunities available for people of all ages to avail. A few of these include scholarships, building planes, and mentoring. Please shoot us an email at youngaviators@eaa20.org to learn more. Updated with Young Aviators, follow our Instagram at YoungAviators1 and our YouTube channel at tinyurl.com/YoungAviators3.